She thought her HOA badge gave her power over everyone, till she tried using it on the one person who knew the law better than her entire board combined. After years away, the lakeside air still smelled the same clean, pine-sweet, and untouched by time. The gravel crunched under the tires the moment the car curved past the edge of the wooded trail. The old cabin came into view. It stood, just as it always had, cedarwood panels weathered by decades of rain, a rusted wind chime clinking lazily, and that same rocking chair creaking on the porch. Nothing about it looked changed, but everything else in life had moved on. That place was a reminder of quieter times, and finally, the time had come to reclaim it. Keys turned in the old lock. Dust danced in the shafts of sunlight cutting through the windows. Inside, furniture remained covered, and the fireplace wore a coat of ash that whispered stories from winters past. Stepping into the kitchen brought a wave of memories. Late night. Cocoa, Grandpa's old coffee tin, the cabinet that still squeaked, no matter how slowly it was opened. Everything was still there, waiting. The land, the water, the trees, they hadn't forgotten. Neither had the deed. The property had been in the family for generations. It's passed down legally, properly documented, and carefully preserved. There were no questions, no disputes. It was a place of peace, tucked far from suburban noise and social pretense. That was why the sight of a strange SUV pulling up in the driveway, shiny, spotless, and aggressively out of place, felt wrong. A woman stepped out wearing sunglasses too large for her face, holding a clipboard and walking like she owned the gravel under her heels. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Her first words weren't hello, but rather a sharp demand for a name and proof of ownership. Her tone didn't suggest concern. It radiated authority, the kind that came from years of unchecked power. She introduced herself as the president of the local homeowners association. The phrasing was deliberate. This area now falls under our HOA jurisdiction. She didn't ask. She informed. The absurdity of it landed hard. This wasn't a development. It was private land, purchased long before her subdivision even existed. She pointed at supposed boundary lines, claiming changes in local zoning had shifted the area into their governing zone. She handed over a printed packet of rules, restrictions, and absurd guidelines about fencing, paint colors, even flag sizes. It wasn't a request for cooperation. It was a demand to comply. When challenged, she didn't hesitate to escalate. Within minutes, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Calmly and with practiced ease, she explained that a suspicious trespasser had entered a property without HOA registration, refused to provide documents, and appeared potentially threatening. There was no panic in her voice, only entitlement. She didn't call because she felt unsafe. She called because she was used to getting her way. The sheriff's vehicle arrived faster than expected, probably due to the cabin's proximity to a small local station. What officer stepped out, one already placing his hand on his holster? She waved them over as if welcoming guests to a party. She recited her version of events with ease, tossing in buzzwords like violation, encroachment, and noncompliance. She had a laminated badge around her neck, one that bore the HOA logo like it meant something legally binding. They approached with standard caution. But something shifted the moment a folder was handed over the original deed. Dated and notarized over 30 years ago, along with updated tax records, utility bills, and photographic evidence of generational ownership, the officers reviewed it carefully. Eyes narrowed, the air changed. The woman's posture faltered. Just slightly, she doubled down, insisting the HOA had recently acquired rights to manage shared access lakefront parcels, a term vague enough to confuse the uninformed. She pointed toward a section of trees by the water line and said it now served as a community wellness trail. That trail, she claimed, cut through her neighborhood's official HOA green space. But there was a problem. The trail didn't exist on any map. No county registry supported the claim. No easement rights had ever been filed. It was a lie cloaked in legal-sounding nonsense. When the sheriff asked her for documentation supporting her claims, her clipboard suddenly looked very thin. The officer flipped through her stack printouts of internal HOA newsletters, unsigned notices, and hand-sketched boundary lines. None of it came from the county. None of it mattered. She was told to step back while things were verified. She did, but not quietly. She muttered about known compliance fees and enforcement protocols, as if her HOA operated like federal law. She threatened fines, sanctions, even liens. But none of it had weight. She wasn't holding power. She was holding paper. As the officers wrapped up, her mask began to crack. The confident smile faded. She realized she hadn't just failed to intimidate someone. She had just accused the legal owner of criminal trespass on their own land. The smugness drained, replaced with cold embarrassment. The officers left without writing a citation, warning either party or acknowledging any HOA authority. No apologies came. Just a frustrated stomp back to her car, a dramatic slam of the door, and a rev of the engine that didn't quite hide the reality. Her game had failed, and that was just the beginning. The next morning, a neatly folded envelope appeared pinned to the cabin's front door. It was labeled Urgent HOA Notice in bold red letters, sealed with a sticker bearing the HOAS logo, a cheap graphic of a lake and mountain wrapped. In a circular border, inside was a printed letter that read more like a court summons than a neighborhood memo. It claimed unauthorized occupancy, demanded backdated HOA dues totaling over $3,700, and included a compliance deadline of 14 days before legal escalation. Alongside the letter was a thick packet titled, "Welcome to the Lakeside HOA Community." It outlined dozens of rules that made little sense for a property tucked a mile into the woods. Lawn height limits, approved mailbox styles, trash pickup schedules, pet registration forms, and mandatory security decals. The policies weren't just overreaching, they were laughably irrelevant. This wasn't a suburb. It was private land surrounded by trees, water, and silence. What wasn't laughable was the HOA's brazenness. The packet included a schedule of upcoming inspections, with a note that the cabin had already failed its preliminary visual compliance assessment for exterior wear, lack of fencing, and unregistered presence on HOA land. The final page threatened fines up to $250 per day, starting immediately. The next few days revealed the extent of Karen's grip on the nearby neighborhood. Flyers appeared on trees along the dirt road, warning about property boundary violators. A community bulletin board near the lake was filled with notices blaming outsiders for declining neighborhood standards. Karen had clearly activated a campaign. It wasn't just about one cabin, it was about control. Fear, confusion, and legal intimidation were her tools. One morning, two men wearing orange vests and carrying clipboards walked onto the property, uninvited. When confronted, they identified themselves as part of the HOA property compliance team, citing their right to routine evaluations. They attempted to photograph the windows, porch, and storage shed. When asked to leave, they claimed refusal would be considered obstruction of HOA procedures. They weren't city inspectors. They weren't law enforcement. They were hired hands from the HOA board, which Karen led. That same day, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel. It used heavy legal jargon, implying the cabin sat within newly expanded boundaries of the Lakeside Residential Community District, giving the HOA jurisdiction. It warned that failure to register as an HOA member could result in liens, property, seizure, and forced arbitration. But the letter contained a fatal flaw. The legal description of the property didn't match the actual coordinates on the deed. It was a bluff designed to scare someone who didn't know any better. Unfortunately for them, this wasn't a case of ignorance. Ownership of the land was backed by original plat maps, GPS, verified surveys, county-registered legal filings, and tax documentation going back decades. Every structure on the property had permits. No part of it overlapped with HOA jurisdiction, not legally, not historically, not geographically, but Karen didn't stop. She began issuing citations addressed to the property owner, complete with serial numbers, dates, and fabricated ordinance codes. Fines were assessed for things like improper vehicle storage because of an old canoe lying beside the shed, and unauthorized structural coloration for the natural wood siding that didn't match the approved HOA earth tones. Letter came with increasing threats. Immediate correction required. This matter has been forwarded to our enforcement committee. Final notice before HOA lien filing. None of it held weight, but it was meant to overwhelm. To make the owner believe resistance was futile, to break them down until they complied or sold. Neighbors started whispering. Some even avoided eye contact. Others dropped hints, quiet acknowledgments that Karen had done this before. Stories emerged about older residents being pressured into voluntary membership or shamed publicly for refusing to follow made-up regulations. One man, a veteran, had left after his boat was declared an eyesore. Another had his gate cut open because it was blocking visual symmetry. Karen had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, like she wore the title of president like a crown. She walked the sidewalks with a clipboard and a pen like they were weapons. She quoted rules that didn't exist and sent letters filled with fake codes and imagined bylaws. And the worst part, people listened. Not because they believed her, but because they feared her. She assumed the same would happen this time. But this time, she had made one fatal mistake, targeting someone who knew how to fight back legally, precisely and without backing down. Karen thought she was dealing with a drifter, someone who'd be scared off by formal letters and copied statutes. She didn't realize she was trying to rewrite law around someone who knew how to write it better. The next move wouldn't be fear or compliance. It would be evidence, exposure, and a paper trail that didn't lead to surrender. It led straight to the courtroom. The more the letters came, the more determined the response became. What started as a simple return to a family cabin had become a calculated assault of paperwork, fines, and intimidation. But this wasn't new territory. Wasn't the first time a petty authority tried to turn legal gray areas into leverage. The difference now was that the cabin's owner wasn't just angry, he was prepared. The first step was tracing the HOA itself. Every association must be registered as a legal entity within the county it operates in. A quick records search revealed the Lakeside Homeowners Association had been filed as a nonprofit several years ago. Its formation documents listed 5 board members, but 3 of the names had already moved out of state. 2 addresses bounced back as undeliverable. Only one name appeared consistently across every filing, every meeting note, and every letterhead. Karen Whitmore. The HOA had been registered, yes, but barely. Their annual reports were incomplete. Financial disclosures were years behind. No documented votes, no verifiable member approvals, no sign of bylaws being reviewed or ratified. It wasn't a functioning homeowners association. It was a shell. Organization running on intimidation and compliance by confusion. The next search was for property boundaries. Official plat maps were requested from the county recorder's office. Side by side with the original deed, it became crystal clear. The cabin, the surrounding acres, the entire parcel, none of it had ever fallen within the HOA's jurisdiction. In fact, the HOA had no legal authority outside a 6-street radius that had been developed much later. The cabin land had been purchased, titled, and grandfathered decades before Karen's neighborhood had even been built. No easements had been filed. No annexations, no petitions from landowners. Nothing existed to support the OC's claim to expand its reach. Then came the zoning research. Pulling county commission minutes and land use proposals showed something unexpected. 2 years ago, Karen had filed a petition to rezone parts of the lakeside area as multi-use communal preservation space. On paper, it sounded harmless: environmental conservation, shared community gardens, wildlife observation trails. But buried in the fine print was a clause proposing that the HOA board would serve as the official steward of the new zone, granting it enforcement rights. The petition had been denied. Flatley County officials cited lack of resident support and improper documentation, but Karen hadn't told anyone that part. Instead, she had acted as if the proposal passed. She used it as the foundation for her harassment campaign, assuming no one would question it. Emails were then pulled from public forums and local Facebook groups. Threads showed patterns. Posts by frustrated neighbors, some deleted, others archived, telling stories of random fines for fence heights, threats for using unapproved contractors, and warnings about being reported for code violations. that didn't exist. Few brave voices even mentioned being shamed in newsletters or called out in community meetings by name. It was HOA ruled by fear, not by law. An anonymous tip came through after a quiet conversation with one of the more reserved neighbors. It led to an archived Dropbox folder someone had saved HOA meeting notes over the years. Reading through them was like watching a dictatorship form one passive-aggressive policy at a time. Notes revealed that Karen had appointed herself as the chair of every subcommittee. Architectural review, budget, compliance, even the neighborhood welcome committee. Votes were recorded, but never in full. Meeting attendance often showed only her initials. There were no audio recordings, no verified quorums. In one memo, she wrote, "Any outside landowners who attempt to encroach or bypass rules must be discouraged with strong documentation and pressure. If they resist, escalate, quickly." That line alone was enough to indicate calculated harassment. But the real nail came from the county property assessor's office. A report showed that Karen had submitted 5 boundary disputes in the past year, all of them dismissed. In 2 cases, she had been fined for filing fraudulent claims. But she had kept the fines quiet and continued pushing forward, banking on the idea that most people wouldn't fight back. She'd lose in court, then turn around and send more letters as if nothing had happened. All the evidence was copied and compiled. Land deeds, legal boundaries, zoning rejections, false citations, harassment claims, board meeting records, and Karen's public statements that directly contradicted legal rulings. The folder was thick and growing. Photos of fake inspection notices, videos of compliance officers trespassing, letters signed with made-up titles like Chief Compliance Liaison. Every piece added fuel to a case that no longer looked like simple overreach. It looked like fraud, coordinated, persistent, possibly criminal. By the time everything had been organized, the documentation stretched over 200 pages. Each page told a story of someone trying to control through pressure, hoping no one would dig deep enough to expose the rot beneath the surface. But the digging was done, and it was time to bring everything into the light. It only took one legal filing to begin unraveling everything Karen had built. A formal complaint was submitted to the county civil court, accompanied by a thick binder of evidence. The claims were clear: fraudulent representation, false boundary, assertions, unlawful attempts at governance, and intentional harassment under the guise of HOA authority. Included were notarized deeds, plat maps, public zoning rejections, and screenshots of every false citation and threatening letter. What Karen had treated like a game was now part of a legal investigation, with real consequences, a cease and desist. The letter was sent next. Drafted by an attorney and served formally to both Karen and the HOA's listed address, it demanded the immediate termination of all contact. False enforcement attempts and unauthorized inspections related to the cabin property. It cited multiple statutes, including misuse of nonprofit status for personal gain and unlawful trespassing by non-governmental entities. Ignoring it would mean escalation to criminal charges. Within days, Karen responded not with an apology or withdrawal, but with more bluster. She filed a counterclaim in HOA records, accusing the cabin owner of aggressive noncompliance and willful ignorance of shared community values. But she made a critical error. She attached that counterclaim to the official county records using falsified supporting documents. That was the moment things shifted from civil to criminal. The county clerk flagged the submission for inconsistencies. A quick verification process revealed that maps had been altered, signatures forged, and dates edited to appear current. Officials didn't just reject her paperwork, they launched an inquiry. Complaint was filed with the state's Department of Consumer Protection. The nonprofit status of the HOA was now under scrutiny for operating outside its chartered limits and attempting to apply pressure beyond its legal reach. A court date was scheduled within 3 weeks at the hearing. The evidence was too overwhelming. To ignore, Karen arrived confident, clutching her clipboard as if it still held authority. But her confidence cracked almost immediately. The judge questioned her on boundary claims she had pushed, asking for official documents supporting the HOA's jurisdiction over the cabin property. She had none. When asked why she had continued to issue citations and threaten fines after being informed of the property's independence from the HOA, her answer stumbled. The plaintiff's attorney presented photos of the fake citations, emails, with threats of fines, and even video of the so-called compliance officers trespassing. Each one was time-stamped and tied directly to Karen's HOA. Then came the meeting notes, the ones showing she had appointed herself to every committee, conducted business without a quorum, and pushed through policies unilaterally. The courtroom remained quiet as the county's land surveyor took the stand and confirmed what had been clear from the start: the cabin was on land that had never at any time fallen under HOA jurisdiction. "This parcel is independently owned," the surveyor stated. "There is no overlap, no shared access, no legal tie between this land and the Lakeside HOA whatsoever." Karen's face visibly changed. The judge didn't take long. Clear ruling. The HOA was ordered to cease all claims of authority over the property, rescind all citations, and dismantle any system used to target non-member properties. Furthermore, the HOA's nonprofit license was flagged for state review. Personal fines were levied against Karen for fraudulent filings and misuse of power, totaling several $1,000s. The court didn't mince words. "What's occurred here," the judge said firmly, "is not neighborhood oversight. It's coercion, plain and simple." Karen left without her clipboard. She didn't speak to reporters outside. The confidence she had weaponized for so long had evaporated in less than an hour. But the legal strike didn't stop there. The story spread quickly through the neighborhood. Residents began questioning every HOA fine they'd received, every citation they'd paid, and every policy they had been pressured into following. A petition circulated calling for the dissolution of the current board and an independent audit of all HOA activities. Many were shocked to learn that what they had believed was law was little more than suggestion enforced through fear. Karen resigned within a week. Publicly, she cited emotional stress and a lack of community appreciation. Privately, her legal counsel had warned her further resistance could open the door to additional lawsuits, this time from neighbors she had manipulated for years. The HOA, once a vehicle of intimidation, was now on the defensive. Was being demanded, audits were underway, and residents who had been silent for too long began speaking up. The entire power structure was collapsing. All it took was one person refusing to back down, one person willing to trace every lie back to its source and strike it with facts, law, and documentation. Karen had spent years building a paper empire of false authority. It only took one legal hit to watch it crumble. The lake was still. No flyers on the trees. No strange SUVs parked along the gravel drive. No fake citations taped to the door. Just the sound of wind through pine needles and the occasional call of a loon gliding across the water. For the first time in weeks, the cabin felt like what it was always meant to be, a place of peace, not a battleground. Word of the court ruling had traveled fast. What started as neighborhood gossip had become a movement. Residents who once looked the other way now came forward. Stories poured out about illegal HOA dues, rules that had no legal basis, and meetings that never allowed for actual votes. A group of neighbors banded together to review the HOA's history. What they found mirrored everything uncovered in court: corruption, manipulation, and an unchecked ego masquerading as governance. Karen's resignation had triggered a full collapse. The HOA's board was disbanded, pending legal review, and a third-party audit was initiated by county authorities. The nonprofit status was officially suspended. All pending fines were voided. Residents who had paid thousands under false threats of liens began exploring legal options for reimbursement. In a matter of days, the HOA went from ruling with intimidation to being stripped of all authority. The cabin quickly became a symbol not just of legal victory, but of standing up against abuse of power. The man who once returned quietly was now being greeted with nods of respect and handshakes by those who once stayed silent. Many confessed they had feared retaliation. Some had stories of Karen threatening to report them to code enforcement for things as petty as mismatched shutters or bird feeders. Her reign had been thorough, but it had also been fragile. Now that fear had shifted directions. Karen had reportedly left town. Her home went dark. No more clipboard walks, no more letters signed with fabricated titles. Some said she moved in with family to escape public embarrassment. Others whispered lawsuits were coming. Whether or not she faced more legal fallout, her influence was over. Permanently, the lakeside community began to change almost immediately. The bulletin board, once plastered with warnings and passive-aggressive notes, now displayed handwritten thank you messages. A free coffee morning was organized by one of the residents who had once been fined for excessive lawn decorations. People brought muffins, folding chairs, and conversations that had been missing for years. New signs were installed, not HOA mandates, but community-made boards that read private property, respect and peace welcome here. The gravel road that Karen once patrolled became a shared path again. Families walked together, dogs off leash, kids riding bikes without being scolded for not wearing approved colors. A kind of unspoken freedom returned. The cabin, once targeted, was no longer seen as a threat. It became a quiet landmark, the place where the lies ended and the truth began. People began to stop by and share their own horror stories. One man revealed he had nearly sold his home after being told his porch furniture violated design codes. Another said Karen threatened to report him for unauthorized landscaping because he planted native wildflowers. It turned out the entire neighborhood had been suffocating under the weight of rules that didn't legally apply. But no one had known how to stop it until someone finally did. As weeks passed, the transformation became visible. Properties looked more personal. Decorations came back. Families that had retreated indoors stepped back into the community. Without Karen's version of control looming over them, people began to live again, without fear of a letter, a fine, or a fake committee showing up at their door. The legal victory reached beyond the lake. County officials began reviewing other HOAs in nearby districts, checking for similar patterns. Karen's downfall had triggered something bigger, a reassessment of what power neighborhood associations should have and what protections individual property owners were entitled to. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a triumph of law over abuse. But for the man who returned to the cabin, it wasn't about headlines. It was about restoration of peace, of legacy, of rightful ownership. That cabin had been in his family long before Karen arrived, long before property lines became political weapons. Reclaiming it wasn't just a personal win, it was justice. He rebuilt the porch swing. He restored the canoe. He spent mornings with coffee in hand, watching mist rise from the lake. No clipboard patrols, no surveillance, just silence and wind, and the gentle slap of water against the rocks. The cabin stood unchanged. The land stood unchanged. But everything else had, and now it belonged fully, peacefully, and lawfully, right where it always did.